2,600 years ago, an adventurous band of Phoenicians escaped the constant wars in the east of antiquity to found a new land, far from the struggle of the Hellenistic world. Their expedition would shape the history of the Mediterranean, and later the entire world. The city they founded would eventually become the torch that carried the light of civilization through the Dark Ages, growing to become a jewel of a global empire that lives on to this day. But back before any of these grand destinies, it was a simple walled settlement on the edge of the civilized world, a frontier city known as Massalia. Over hundreds of years, the settlement grew into a trading hub of 6,000 men and women, an outpost of Greek culture sitting on the lip of a dark and untamed barbarian land. But in fact, it was those barbarians that bolstered the numbers of the original families, leading to a city defended by a proud mix of Greeks and Gauls, sharing the culture in a bid to build a trading empire that could dominate the Mediterranean. And they succeeded. By the 3rd century BC, the city was defended by high walls and ruled by an assembly of wealthy nobles, maintaining a free republic in a world of slavery and war. But the ancient world was a treacherous place, and soon the city of Massalia found itself facing a choice: to surrender to the dark forces of the world, or to make the ultimate gambit for freedom by bringing their full strength to bear in total war. This is the story of the choice they made. In the year 272 BC, the Massalia ruling council appointed one of their own magistrates, Zenon, as the Grand Commander of the then feeble city guard. He was not a man of proven ability when it came to military matters. The appointment was most likely a move by the council to reduce Zenon's influence, for traditionally a Massalian army fought a battle for survival, with the chance of death being greater than the chance of glory. Zenon was a man of the people, and was thusly feared by the council. It is easy to imagine that entrusting him with the defense of the city was to them simply a noble form of execution. Hello and welcome to Massalia Tales, a narrative let's play of Rome Total War 2. Here is Massalia itself. It is a port city on the northwest coast of the Mediterranean in the province of Provincia. I'm going to show you my opening game strategy, but for the most part this is going to be a very summative let's play in which I only include the most interesting points that influence the history of Massalia as the campaign goes on. Here is our main commander Zenon, leading the daemons of Polymus. I'm sending him out of the city to begin patrolling the region as part of his new role as the leader of the very small Massalian armed forces, who at the moment don't have anything in particular to do. They're only charged with defending the region, but since we don't have any enemies, there's no particular focus for them. I'm also going to reduce the city's tax level. This is because the majority of the income is from base income rather than actual taxes, so reducing the tax level has almost no effect on the monetary situation. Zenon here is listed as a man of compassion, a man who people in general look up to as a virtuous individual. He's 35, not particularly ambitious, and has just started really his campaign as a military officer. I'm promoting him to a role to oversee the marketplace. This improves the public order in the region and improves our income as well, giving him a little bit more power on the ruling council. I'm going to also invest a very large amount of money in upgrading the city itself. This improves the strength of its garrison if it's attacked and improves my income once all of the construction is complete, though for now it has drained my treasury completely. Now I need to look at the opening game diplomatic situation. The question is, can I convince any of the many barbarian tribes who surround the city of Massalia to not attack me? The guys to the east, the Ligurians, are already in a non-aggression pact with me, so that's good news, but they won't trade. Everyone else, as you can see here, pretty much refuses non-aggression. It seems the idea of peace between these Hellenites in Massalia and the many different tribes around the place is out of the question. The Romans too almost considered going into a non-aggression pact, but then backed down, so it seems the historic ally of the Massalians is not going to be joining us in this campaign. Unfortunate. I wanted to see if any of the less important mountain tribes of the Alps were willing to go into non-aggression, but of course they weren't. So the opening situation in the game is that no one is willing to befriend us, and we're going to stride forward into an uncertain future. Now, actually 2 turns later, the Helvetii to the northeast of us declare war on us. They already hated us quite a lot, and I believe in the game we've been at war with them in the past because they begin with very poor diplomatic relations with us. So it makes sense that they would want to resume the war with us. Not too bad, but then the Volcae to the west declare war on us as well. These are the guys who control the rest of Provincia, so defeating them means we can unify our province. However, we're now under threat from both the northeast and the west, meaning my army has to stay very close to the city to cover the possible approaches of an enemy force. Quite inconvenient. I'm going to research the ability that allows me to recruit a champion so that I can train up this relatively unpowerful army. You can see I've built up a few forces, mostly levies though, combined levies of Greek and Gallic origin. I'm also going to recruit a spy. We get a young woman named Iphianassa, only 17 years old, and a trained scout, which means she has improved line of sight over other spies, quite useful. So with her, I can work out which of my enemies is going to attack me first. I suspect it's the Volcae, so I am planning to send her to the west since they are closer in terms of their home base. Zenon's force, which is going to have to steadily grow, is going to for now pull back inside the city, just because I'm worried about him being attacked outside of the city and the reinforcement from the city being cut off. If he's in the city, it's an ideal defensive position, and because he is so popular, the city doesn't really mind him garrisoning his men in their homes, so we don't get a public order penalty.
At your command.
I understand your concerns, friends. If it were up to me, the city would see nothing of the fighting to come, but simply put, we cannot decide the place of battle when the strength and intent of the enemy is unknown. Soon I shall have the intelligence I need to resume a defensive campaign. See to it, Zenon. Your untamed men are unwelcome in the homes of our people. Your decision to disrupt the city out of personal fear has been noted. Now, onto other matters more important than your misgivings. It's time to find out what the Volcae have in store. I'm going to send my spy west to work out what sort of troops they have. We can see all of them are currently in their capital city of Tolosa. They have a fairly substantial army. It looks like it's mostly levies though, just a couple of units of heavy infantry. So in many ways it matches my army, which too is mostly levies, but I can now recruit proper infantry because I've constructed the proper buildings, so I can recruit hoplites and some more varied units such as swordsmen and peltasts. So later that year, in the winter of 271, Iphianassa has found herself a snake, good for her, and we can see that the Volcae army has grown to its maximum size. They now have 20 regiments sitting in their capital and have started a new army. I'm going to start researching my way towards some scholarship so that I can get a dignitary to help govern my province so that I can more effectively remove my generals such as Zenon. I don't rely on him being present to keep public order. I was considering using my spy to sabotage some of these forces, but the chance of success was quite low, and I decided I'd rather keep the money to recruit new units for now, especially because the enemy aren't on the move. Any damage I do now may just be repaired before they arrive. For Zenon himself, it's finally time to get his forces out of the city. It's not a really good idea to have a full stack sitting in the city in the Divide a Impera mod, because the mod reverses the way in which forces influence public order, meaning having more armies in the city reduces order in general. So instead, I'm setting up a fortification outside the city, still a good defensive position that could also defend against attacks from the north if the Helvetii suddenly make an appearance. So moving into the next turn, the Volcae are on the move. Some of their forces rush east towards us and then seemingly disappear. This was quite strange. I decided to use my spy to try and work out what had happened. I sent her down to the area where I saw the enemy forces disappear, but they're completely gone and she can't find them either. They seem to have gone into hiding, perhaps in the forest to the north of the road. Upgrading her to the next level and giving her more cunning doesn't help either. So we don't know where the Volcae are, but we have some reassurances that they're going to be on the way towards our city. So I know I'm going to be attacked soon, but my defenses are already in place. What I did want to do is recruit a new commander, so I'm getting a new guy by the name of Zenon to come and join our forces. He is going to command a new city guard that will stay behind to defend the city if Zenon has to pull our main army over towards Tolosa province in order to fight the Volcae on their own territory. This guy is a pretty good city administrator, which is why I chose him. He will improve public order by his presence, which is good news. You can see he has some good traits for that. He also has a brutal wife, which unfortunately means that slaves in the city don't like him very much, I guess because his wife is going around whipping all the slaves. Not good. He is actually not part of the ruling council, which means he is yet to be properly elected into the true echelons of power in Massalian society, but perhaps this new role will give him a chance to do that. The Volcae move one regiment of forces to go and lay siege to Massalia. I thought that was strange, but then I immediately realised why they've done that. This was an extremely good move from the AI. What they've done is besiege the city with one regiment, which means all of the city guards can't come out to take part in the battle, which they've now started outside the walls. They've got their main force attacking my main force, and according to the balance of power, the enemy have a substantial advantage. My reinforcements can't join me, which is what I was really counting on by camping so close to the city, but hopefully I can defend against these guys anyway. Here is the camp I'm going to defend. I'm making sure I get all the choke points occupied with my hoplites. The east side and the west side are going to be occupied by my militia. Meanwhile on the south side, Zenon is going to lead his elite Massalian royal hoplites to guard the approach. He will be the most successful. The militia also have some regular hoplites units backing them up as reserves, so they should do okay. The enemy are approaching in two groups, one from the west, one from the southeast. The western one is leading with heavy infantry, their best unit coming in first, which is actually a poor idea for the enemy, as we'll see in a moment. The enemy's approach from the southeast is mostly just a big mix of levied spears, and they're going to have to get through a number of traps. You can see I've set barricades, and I've got some giant caltrops to stop their cavalry as well. I also had burning tar pits, as we saw just for a second there, on the south side. Inside the camp I have big reserves of slingers, cavalry and swordsmen, and I'm just going to wait for an opportunity to come outside of the camp and attack the enemy with them. Here's Zenon himself leading his men right from the front. Now my first move was to send some of my Gallic troops outside the south part of the camp to set light to the brimstone pits. These will damage the enemy as they move across them during their approach. However, my troops now need to get out of the area where the pits are, and unfortunately they set themselves on fire in some cases on the way out. They didn't quite realise they're not meant to step in those pits. But for the most part, they're getting away, and I'm going to bring them back inside the camp. The enemy actually almost catch them coming into the camp, but luckily they're not going to. And this regiment, instead of chasing my troops inside using the southeast entrance, they're going to go around to the southwest entrance, and on the way, walk themselves right across my brimstone pits. Very kind of them. This was a chance to see whether the pits would do any damage right away. Most of the enemies have the sense to go around the pits, but a few of them indeed manage to replicate the failures of my own troops by walking right through them and taking casualties as a result. In the west part of the camp, the enemy's heavy swordsmen are making their way towards my hoplite line. They're also being followed by some cavalry who have fortunately been stopped by all those giant caltrops. The enemy's swords are going to begin to engage with my hoplites from the front. They'll do okay in this situation. My hoplites are meant to be fighting frontwards, but against these heavy swordsmen they shouldn't do that well. The enemy's cavalry, who've managed to get their way inside, will do badly against the hoplites, so that's good news. Now the main way that I have to get rid of these swordsmen is to send in my jabs, which I'm doing right now. Meanwhile on the south side, Zenon and his men are holding off some enemy levies. He should do very well against them. His elite troops are far more trained than the enemy's. So once my jabs are in position, they're going to throw over the top of my hoplite line and basically just spam the enemy's sword ranks with these javelins, which do extreme damage. You can see the enemy's swordsmen are being bloodied very much by these javelins, and they've already lost a good number of their troops and this is pretty much entirely due to the javelins. My hoplites are not really going to be killing them at all. So without the javelins, these guys would fight on for a very long time. So I wanted to get rid of them, knowing they were the strongest unit in the enemy's army. Meanwhile, on the east side of the camp, the enemy are putting in a less spirited attack up against my hoplites there. You can see my hoplites aren't really defending very strongly either. They're just sitting there, waiting for the enemy to come in, and the enemy seems somewhat indecisive. Gah, looks like he glanced me. No, it's just a cut, I'm fine. Have the reinforcements been spotted? What? Well then it's too late. Damn the council, they wish to see me destroyed out here. That must be why that knight Zenon was made city guard commander and I was given this meaningless title of strategos. I thought it was out of character for those old vultures, and now I see exactly why. Well then boys, it seems all of us have been slated for death by our countrymen. Does anyone fancy showing them what it means to betray the daemons of Polymus? Let's give them regret served from a barbarian skull. In the southern entrance, I've sent in all of my remaining Gallic troops to stem the enemy's advance, wishing not to have Zenon do all of the fighting because I don't want to risk him being killed since he'll be right on the front line. Unfortunately, you can see some of my Gallic levies are already on the way out. They routed quite quickly, so Zenon had to replace them after just a short rest. His elite troops will easily be able to replace their part of the line, but it's a shame that they didn't last very long. Perhaps they don't like fighting against their former compatriots in arms. Meanwhile, on the east side, the enemy have very heavily attacked with cavalry. They've got tons of cavalry pressing into my hoplites. Unfortunately, that cavalry is not going to do much. The main threat are the infantrymen who are snuck in between those cavalry, but they are going to push me back just because of their sheer weight, but they're not going to kill many of my men. Now, those Gallic levies who routed unfortunately destroyed the barriers on the western part as they went out. They were so desperate to escape, they annihilated some of my own defences. Luckily, this part of the battlefield has become quite clear. The enemy doesn't have many men left, and they're not really engaging me very heavily, just a few guys coming in, whilst the rest of them take missile fire. On the south side, the enemy engagement is rapidly lightening as their troops begin to rout in the face of Zenon's troops, who are simply destroying them, pushing them back out of the camp and killing large numbers of them. I've got some more Gallic levies to back him up, and together with them, they started pretty much annihilating the forces on the south part of the camp. The enemy has mostly levies themselves, who just can't stand up against Zenon's elite hoplites. On the east side, the enemy's cavalry are still trying to get in. You can see we've been pushed quite far back from the gate entrance now, but for the most part our troops are still all alive and our line is holding quite well. The hoplites haven't lost their formation. The enemy are going to do some cycle charges, but it's not going to have any effect. On the west side, I decided I've got an opening to potentially get some of my cavalry outside of the camp if I can just push a few of the remaining enemy troops here out of the way of the gatehouse. So I'm sending in my swords to try and do that. Unfortunately, at the same time, the enemy has deployed their one elite spear unit, their heavy spears, and my swords are going to struggle to get past them. You can see my guys are relatively unarmoured. The enemy have these heavy chainmail clad spear nobles with their giant shields. My swordsmen having a really difficult time getting past them, especially because enemy cavalry are marauding around my very loose formation there. So you can see the camp remains besieged on all sides. The enemy are beginning to burn down some of the barricades here on the east side, but for the most part they are continuing to attack with their cavalry, who are continuing to be gradually defeated. You can see the floor is mostly covered in enemy bodies, even though we have been pushed quite far back from our original position. But you can see our ranks are still extremely thick. We have like 16 ranks of depth here in our defences, which means the enemy stand almost no chance of getting inside the camp. On the west side, my swordsmen started to do quite well actually, fighting against the enemy's heavy spears. They managed to push them back out of the entrance to the camp and started to push them outside of this camp choke point altogether. My swordsmen are under pressure though. You can see this one guy is being attacked by 3 enemy spear nobles at the same time. There's not much he can do to attack them. They're protected from neck to shin by these giant shields, as he has only a tiny shield which he's using to deflect the constant blows from enemy troops. But they're holding on, and as a result of holding on, the enemy are beginning to lose hope. On the south side, the enemy are not just losing hope, they're losing their men. Zenon's hoplites have killed almost all of them. Just a single thin line of enemies remains to be defeated. In the east gate, the enemy are starting to fall back. Good news, their infantry are pulling out of the fight. Their cavalry are also so exhausted that their continued cycle charges are now doing nothing. The infantry, the only remaining threat, and as I've said, my big thick line isn't going to let them through. On the west part, we pushed the enemy so far back that finally I could get my cavalry outside. I'd hoped to do this from the very beginning. I'd hoped in fact the enemy would not attack one gate and I could sally out. But finally, now my cavalry are outside, they can destroy all of the enemy's missile units who've been peppering me for the entire fight, and actually did somewhat substantial damage to my own missile units inside the camp. The enemy don't stand any chance. The cavalry simply overwhelm their light formation, which was loosely spaced, and very easy for my cavalry to get inside and start stabbing them to death. So we broke them, and at the same time as we break them, the entire enemy army breaks simultaneously. It seemed it triggered a chain rout. The enemy took too many army losses to fight on. All of the camp approaches were successfully won. Casualties were actually quite low. The tight hoplite phalanxes didn't allow the enemy to really get into our formations and fight as they fight best. So overall, it was a superb fight for Zenon and his men. So who needs the city garrison when our own army is already powerful enough to win a heroic victory over this Gallic horde? We defeated over 2,000 of the enemy, losing around 300 of our own troops. Pretty much a superb result, exactly the sort of thing we need. So Zenon has shown the enemy forces that he is something to be reckoned with, and now he has to decide what to do with his captives, and furthermore, what to do with the Volcae tribe, who are now in a position of weakness. We'll see where he goes with this next time on Massalia Tales. The barbarian army had first employed a ruse against the city to isolate Zenon and his company. A small band of men lit fires and raised banners within sight of the walls, leading the nervous guard commander, Zenon, to believe the full force of the enemy was about to attack. He held his entire force inside the city, waiting in fear for an assault that would never come. Meanwhile, Zenon led his own troops to a victory that catapulted him to eternal fame. Inadvertently, the council had made their secret enemy into a war hero, and the people would not quickly forget their debt to Zenon.